Well, how's everybody this morning? I mean, after that worship time, I know you guys online are cheering louder than they just cheered here in the house because we just sang about this is your house, okay? So let's try that again. Grabbing my jumper cables. I know you guys are wondering what's up with church today. And so how's everybody doing this morning? That was much better. You guys heard that online, I'm sure. But hey, welcome to Rocket City Church. If this is your first time with us, make sure to stop by the welcome tent, get your free shirt, hang out, enjoy church, worshiping God with us. In case you're wondering, we love doing church for unchurched people. And so if the worship is a little loud, let me tell you what that does. It helps make guys like me that kind of are not sure if I'm supposed to raise my hand, but I can identify with a really loud concert. It makes me feel comfortable, right? And so, but as a church guy that I grew up in church my whole life, I'm having to rethink church because I am a church guy. And so then I have to think, well, what does church look like to leave the 99 that we just sang about and go after the one? Amen? Man, that's what we are about. That's what our heart beats for. And so if you have a neighbor, friend, coworker, acquaintance, relative that is far from God that you're praying for to come to know Jesus, man, we want this church to be the place for them. Well, not long ago, I was in my neighborhood and I got a message from a neighbor and he said, hey, do you happen to have a set of jumper cables? And I said, well, just by chance, I do, right? And I'll bring them down. And so I brought my jumper cables down and I looked under his wife's minivan hood and I said, hey man, what's going on? Because that's what you do, right? If you're a guy and you look under the hood, you go, hey, what's going on right here? And it doesn't really mean you actually know anything about what's going on. You just play the part, right? And so I'm like, hey man, what's going on with the van? And he goes, I don't know, it just won't start. So I'm like, well, let's give it a whirl. So he took the cables and hooked them up to his truck, and then I took the other end, and I, you know how it goes, right? Like I'm sure you guys have done this before, but you take the black and it goes onto the black post, and you take the red and it goes onto the red post. And so I went to do that, and all of a sudden sparks were flying and smoke was happening, right? And I'm like, oh. So I signaled to the guy in his truck, and he came out. I go, dude, you've got a major problem. Like, this van has major electrical issues. Like, you're going to have to take this thing in. He goes, that's what I thought, we've been having problems. And I go, but you know what? There's one guy in the neighborhood that I'm thinking about that knows vehicles. I'm just going to go see if he's home. So I walk down. Sure enough, the guy's home. And so I bring him down with me, and I kind of pass him off to the neighbor. And then I head by. I say, hey, I'll see you guys, and I'll be back in a little bit. So I came back down a little bit to get my cables, see what's going on. And I heard the van car running and engines running. And so I looked at the really handy guy, and I go, hey, how'd you guys get the car running? And he goes, yeah, it was the craziest thing. He goes, the battery was just dead. And he goes, and whoever tried to hook up the jumper cables earlier just had them backwards. And I said, I don't know who that guy is, but I'll return his jumper cables to him. Man, we're in the middle of this series called God of the Underdog. And God of the Underdog has been a series that we've already had a ton of fun with. 2 weeks ago, Pastor Andy kicked it off for us and talked about David. And then last week, my wife did an amazing job talking about Esther, the gal who became queen, and how God used her, even though her chances were slim in her mind. And it's based off of a book, actually, by Matt Keller called God of the Underdog. And so if you are looking for a great summer read, pick up the book. I know you'll enjoy it as much as I've enjoyed it. Well, what's an underdog? I think we kind of have an idea, but what is an underdog? Well, an underdog is, by definition, a competitor who has little chance of winning, a person who has little status in society. It's a competitor who has little chance of winning, or a person who has very little status in society. Now, here's the good news, is that everybody loves an underdog. Everybody loves an underdog. And I think the reason that hits our heart is because we can identify with that. We know what it's like to have slim chances. We know what it's like to have the odds stacked against us in life or in vocation or in relationships or in whatever area of life that we've experienced hard times through. And today we're going to look at a particular underdog. A guy named Simon is what early on he's called in the Bible, but then later Jesus gives him the name Peter. And so Simon Peter is this guy that starts out as an underdog. And every underdog that we find, they have an excuse of some sort that they could use to say, well, I'm an underdog. This is why God can't use me. And so today for Peter's underdog excuse very easily could have been something like this: I'm weary from long nights and empty boats. I'm weary from long nights and empty boats. And the truth is, we can all connect with this statement, can't we? Man, to be honest, I am tired of working really hard at this relationship and coming up with nothing. God, I'm really exhausted. I feel like I don't even know if you see how hard I'm working here. Man, even as a pastor, when I get down and discouraged, I feel like, God, are you even seeing all the work and the effort that myself and my wife and my family are putting in to see the kingdom come here in the Rocket City and beyond? And we can kind of live there for a while, can't we? And we begin to think, well, God, I don't even know, like, should I even keep working at all? Because I keep working and I'm exhausted and my boat keeps coming up empty. My boat keeps coming up empty. And so our story today is found in Luke chapter 5. If you have your Bible app or your Bible with you, you can follow along with us. If not, we'll have it up here on the screen for you. But a little bit of background. In Luke chapter 4, we see that Jesus is becoming very popular. Now, Luke is part of the Gospels, which is at the very beginning of the New Testament. And so you have these first 4 books of the New Testament, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, and they all talk about the life of Jesus. And Bible scholars call them the Gospels because it literally means good news, the good news of Jesus that he brings to the world. And so in Luke chapter 5, Luke was a physician by trade. And so when he started following Jesus, he kept meticulous records and kept a lot of the accounts of a lot of the compassion works that Jesus did, which makes sense, right? Coming from a former physician. And so here's Luke and recording in Luke chapter 4, in verse 14 and verse 37, it talks about how news about Jesus spread throughout the whole countryside. And so translation, Jesus was going viral the old-fashioned way. And then we get to Luke chapter 5. And maybe, just maybe, Jesus had a strategic plan going on in his head. We don't exactly know the ins and outs about that. We can't read his mind, but what we do know is what happened. And it wasn't going to be long, the next couple of years, that Jesus would be crucified, would be resurrected, and then would eventually return to the Father. And so to carry out his work, he needed disciples or followers or people here on earth that can embody his message and then live that out on the daily. And so what would that look like? Well, it would look like he would have to establish his first few followers. Now, not the crowds. We're not talking about the crowds today. We're talking about his first disciples, the real guys that got down in the nitty-gritty and said, you know what, I want to follow you. And so Jesus came and showed up in verse 1 of chapter 5, and that's where we're going to pick up our story today. It says, verse 1, one day, as Jesus was standing by the lake of Gennesaret, also the Sea of Galilee, the people were crowding around him, listening to the word of God as he was teaching. And he saw at the water's edge 2 boats left there by the fishermen who were washing their nets. And he got into one of the boats, the one belonging to Simon, and asked him to put out a little from shore. Then he sat down, which was typical of great teachers of that day. The teachers would sit and the students, they would stand. And so then he sat down and taught the people from the boat. When he had finished speaking, he said to Simon, put out into deep water and let down the nets for a catch. Now, catch this. Simon answered, Master, we've worked hard what? We've worked hard how long? How long? All night, and we haven't caught anything. But because you say so, I will let down the nets. Now understand, from a young age, every Jewish boy was taught the Torah, which was the first 5 books of the Old Testament. Every Jewish boy was taught the Torah, and they would know that almost from rote memory. And then the star pupils, the ones that were the lottery picks, the first round draft choices, then they would get scooped up by the great teachers of the day, like Gamaliel and other great Jewish teachers. And then the other pupils, the ones that didn't quite make the first round, the second round, the third round, the later rounds of the draft, like the Mr. Irrelevance of the drafts, right? And like they had to go back doing regular Jewish work in society. And so here we see Peter, and then his buddy James and John, and even Andrew was thought to be there. These guys were fishing, which means they weren't following a great teacher, which means they weren't first round draft picks. They didn't have first chair in the orchestra. And here they were out fishing for a living. I want to ask us a question this morning that may resonate with some of us, but have you ever worked hard all night like Peter in verse 5 and caught nothing? Have you ever worked really hard on a project or on a relationship, and you pulled your boat up and you looked down and you didn't have anything? It didn't go as planned. It didn't work out as planned. The job wasn't what you thought it would be. I'll never forget, as a youth pastor, I came out of seminary and I took my first job. I was a single guy, so I got hired on as a high school youth pastor at a church up in West Michigan. And I had a bunch of high school graduates in my first year, and they were all graduating about this time of the year. And so I planned in the spring this incredible graduation trip for them. And I rented this houseboat on a lake in Kentucky. And it would sleep up to 12 people, and I was going to get food, and I reserved the boat and paid a big deposit down on it, and I planned this trip, and I prayed, and I'm like, this is going to be amazing. They're going to think I'm the greatest youth pastor ever, right? And we come down to the sign-up deadline, and I had one kid sign up for my trip, and then the deadline came and went, and I extended the deadline, still the one kid. I extended the deadline again, still the one kid. And finally I looked at the one kid. I go, hey, if you want to go ahead and flunk, then you can just come back next year, and we'll have more people, and we can actually do the trip. And he's like, no, Pastor Brian, I'm going to graduate. We'll see you, right? And man, I felt like such a failure. I thought I knew my students. I planned this amazing trip. Like, I worked hard on this. I invested resources and part of my budget from my church. And man, it just fell apart. And it didn't resonate within what they wanted to do. And I know you've been there, right? I know you've been there where you've planned, you've prayed, you've worked hard, and then you came up empty at the end of the day. But then here's what happened in our story. Here's what happened in our story. And then Jesus showed up. Look, you guys, maybe this is the word from God that you needed today. And you can just stop right here. You can say, Brian, I don't care what you talk about the rest of the day. Like, this is what, like, when Jesus shows up in our life, you guys, it changes everything. It changes everything. And then Jesus showed up after you're tired and you don't have any more patience and you're out of resources and you're out of brain power and you're out of money and you're out of emotional energy. And then Jesus shows up and changes everything. And maybe, just maybe, you need him to do that in your life today. Maybe you actually came here without a relationship with Jesus. Now, sure, you've heard a lot about him, but it's esoteric. It's up here. It's not personal. It's not down here. And for you, that's what you're missing in your life. because you're tired from doing life on your own power, on your own strength, and nothing seems to fully work out. Or if it does, you don't have the peace that you seems like that other people have peace in Christ in, and that they found. And so maybe Jesus needs to show up for you in your life, and that's step one. Our mission statement at Rocket City Church is helping people know and follow Jesus. Like that's what we would love to do for you today, is help you know and follow Jesus. And it starts by allowing Jesus just to show up, just to start, just to step foot in your boat and say, let's start this together. Maybe it's other areas. Maybe you're like me and you've been following Jesus for a while, but you've got some physical pain that you're dealing with, and you need Jesus to show up physically in your life. You know, I just talked to a guy this week at a coffee shop that just ended a relationship that was super hard, and I could tell he was incredibly emotional about it. Man, I would venture to say that if I asked him and he were here today, he would say, man, you know what, I need Jesus to show up for me, but in a comforting, like encouraging way, that it's going to be okay, and I'm here for you, and I'm in the boat with you, even though you think you haven't caught anything, like I'm here, and I'm enough. If Peter were here, I think he would say that everything changed when Jesus showed up. And then if we ask him, because I would want to know, okay, well, that's great, Peter. Everything changed when Jesus showed up. But then how did that happen? And I think he would say to us, based on this story, hey, everything changed when Jesus showed up. And the reason it did is because he looked at me and he said, Peter, do it again. Do it again. And what are you talking about, Jesus? No, yeah, let's go fishing again. Right, verse 5, Master, we've worked hard all night. And in case you haven't looked in the boat, like this is how I feed my family. I'm a professional commercial fisherman. This is how I make a living. And I caught nothing. And you're telling me that you want me to do it again? Look, here's why this is important, is after we've worked hard all night and we found ourselves tired and weary from long nights and empty boats, that we can easily use this as an excuse to say, God, I'm not going to listen to you anymore. I'm tired. I'm exhausted. I'm pulling my boat up on the shore and I'm done, right? I'm walking away. I don't have time to listen to you right now. I don't have time for your words of wisdom. You're telling me to go back out and to give it another try. Like what are you thinking? God, I can't do it. I'm just disengaging. Let's be honest, I'm just going to disengage from fishing and from you and from life. Did you know that you can actually show up to church and be disengaged spiritually? Did you know that you can actually go to work and still be disengaged at your job? Did you know that you can be in a marriage and actually be disengaged in that marriage? This is what happens after long nights and empty boats, is that weariness and perceived failure oftentimes just takes us out. And then the Apostle Paul speaks up, a guy that knows a thing or two about being tired and serving God and having a perceived failure in his life. And he says this in Galatians chapter 6. Let us not be what? Let us not become weary in doing good, for at the proper time we will reap a harvest if we do not what? If we do not what? If we do not give up. Therefore, as we have an opportunity, let us do good to all people, especially to those who belong to the family of faith, or the family of believers. I think Jesus wants us to do it again, to go back out and fish again after we failed, and catch this, even after we've succeeded. I think sometimes success is harder than failure. Because when we're tired and we're exhausted and we've exhausted all of our emotional energy and resources, then finally we're in a place, I think this is why Jesus approached Peter at this moment, as we're finally in a place to listen to God. But if he'd had a boat full of fish and Jesus said, do it again, he'd have said, man, you're crazy. I know what I'm doing. You're a teacher. You handle the teaching stuff. I'm going to handle the fishing stuff. Yeah, you know, it's easy to quit, isn't it? Man, it's so easy to quit on church because of people that maybe don't treat us quite right, and because they're hurt, and hurt people, right? And it's easy to quit on faith and just say, you know what, I'm done. I'm doing life on my own terms. I'm going to make my own money. I'm going to spend it how I want, live how I want. I'm not going to believe in anything I can't see tangibly and touch. I'm done. I'm giving up. Man, even after success, it's easy to take our foot off the gas. You know, recently this week, as I was preparing for this talk, I began to be somewhat self-reflective, and God kind of tugged at my heart, and he said, Brian, you know, in June of last year, when COVID was starting to ramp up, you prayed a lot, and you prayed some dangerous, fervent prayers. And now, like, you're still praying, but your prayers are not anything like they were. And what's changed? Well, you've got a church now, and everything's seemingly going pretty well, and you're reaching people, and lives are being changed. Like, I don't know if you've heard this, Brian, but you don't take your foot off the gas now. I want to be closer to you now than I ever have been. Oh man, it was like God just reached inside my chest and grabbed my heart and just gently squeezed it and said, I miss you. I want more time with you. Don't give up. Don't pull up short. Keep loving on people. Keep reaching the community. Keep mobilizing Rocket City Church. Partner with other churches and other organizations that are reaching people for Jesus. I mean, we have someone here today that's hoping to plant a church here soon, another life-giving church in our community, and we're so excited about that. Right? Keep being the church, Brian. Don't quit. Don't get tired. Don't get weary. Keep doing good. Keep serving people. Keep seeking to bless people. Don't laugh. Just because I almost blew up my neighbor's engine. Man, I could easily go, God, see there? Every time I try to serve somebody, this is what happens. Every time I put myself out there, this is what happens. Right? Is it just doesn't go right. It doesn't go well. I know I'm not handy, but I keep trying. And right. But like I could just hold up and say, God, I'm tired. Long nights, empty boats. This is what happens. You know, just this week, my wife, a couple of weeks ago, felt compelled to invite her boss over for dinner, because he's retiring and he's widowed not long ago, and she just really has enjoyed working for him. And she said, you know what, let's invite him over for dinner. And so we did this week, and he's not fully planted in a local church, and so we're just trying to love on him and bless him and serve him, right, and be Jesus to him, be hospitable, and just be Christ to someone that just needs encouragement in this season of life as they're getting ready to hit a significant milestone transition in their career. And so they come over, and my wife, she hands me the chicken, And she says, you're going to grill the chicken for tonight. And I said, okay, I got you. I can do that. And so I go out to my 15-year-old Weber gas grill and I crank it up and it's still working and going strong. And I put the chicken on there and I close the hood and I come back inside and all of a sudden I get to talking to John. Hey man, so glad you came over. Heard a lot of good things about you. Thanks for taking care of my wife. So glad at church. All of a sudden my wife goes, honey, like there's smoke coming out of your grill. And so I'm like, you got to be kidding me. And so I go out and I realize that when you put Italian dressing all over chicken and you just throw it on the grill and you close the hood and you leave it, like that's not the best idea on a gas grill. And so I pull the hood up and I wish I could have like videoed it while I was right, but there's flames. I mean, there was flames and there was smoke and it was ugly. And I'm like trying to pull the chicken and the chicken is not chicken anymore. It's some other version of something that was on a grill. And all of a sudden we bring it in and Shannon looks at me and she goes, you got to go to Publix. And I go, honey, John's here. And so we made it work, right? We cut them up into little pieces that you couldn't really even see what you were eating. And then we ate it and it worked and it was fine. Look, as I was thinking about that experience this week, how many times in our life have we failed and said, God, I'm done. Here it is again. I try and I put myself out there and I extend and I get authentic with people and I get heartbroken again. Or they don't measure up to what I thought, or you don't measure up, God, to who I thought you were. And you're not showing up like I want you to show up for me. And so I'm done. And I felt, again, as I was preparing this week, and I felt God tug at my heart again and said, Brian, don't stop inviting the Johns of the world over for dinner. Because they need that. And you need that. Right? And maybe next time just order out, right? And have the food delivered. And that'll be a better option. Man, sometimes we just get tired of trying with people, don't we? I mean, we just get weary from doing good, and then Jesus comes along and we meet somebody else that we know we can minister to, that we have something to offer to, and Jesus comes along and he tugs at our heart and he says, hey, do it again. Look, I showed up and I'm here. Do it again. Okay. Verse 5. Master, we've worked hard all night. We haven't caught anything, but because you say so, I will let down the nets. Now, here's the catch. When you do it again, you have to do it God's way. Right? And that's like sometimes we're good at doing it again, but it's the whole God's way thing that changes the dynamic for us. I know Peter's thinking here, look, Jesus, I know how to fish. I'm a commercial fisherman, and you're a teacher, at best a carpenter, and you're telling a commercial fisherman how to fish? By a quick show of hands, if you're joining us online, you can raise your hand as well. How many of you just can't stand it when people tell you what to do? Right? All right. If you're not raising your hand, you are one of those people, and you're lying right now, right? You're one of the people that said, Pastor Brian, I ain't raising my hand because you just told me to raise my hand, right? Like, I could only imagine that Peter potentially was one of those guys. And who do you think you are telling me what to do? But he says, but because you say so, I will let down the nets. Now, we read it earlier in verse 4, but verse 4, Jesus looks at Peter and he says, push out into deep water. Now, in another recording of this, and this is just an inference on my part, but in another recording of this same story in the Gospel of Mark, it kind of insinuates there's no talk of a boat. And so it was almost like they were throwing nets out into shallow water. And so And so in my mind, what if they were fishing all night in the shallow water, because that's where the fish should be at night on the Sea of Galilee in the shallow water, and Jesus gets in the boat and he says, push out into deep water and let down the nets for a catch. But in the deep water, Jesus, that's where the waves get up. I mean, I've been on the Sea of Galilee and it was like this, and it was just moderately cloudy and windy that day. I mean, it's dangerous out in deep water, right? Like, we don't mind, even at the beach, like, we don't mind the knee deep but it's the deep water that makes us have to rely on Jesus, doesn't it? I mean, it's the deep water that makes you move across the country and start a life-giving church, right? It's the deep water that makes you show up to church when you're not used to going to church and you don't know what it's going to be like. I mean, all that's deep water kind of stuff. That when you've always dated people that don't honor God first in their life and then honor you second, and you push out into deep water and you try to do it God's way and you try to do it Jesus' way, and you say, okay, I'm drawing a line in the sand. It's a new non-negotiable for me that they have to love Jesus more than they love me, or we're not going to go out. That's deep water. Put out into deep water and let down the nets for a catch. Psalm chapter 1. What delight comes to the one who follows God's ways? Do it God's way. He won't walk in step with the wicked, nor share the sinner's way, nor be found sitting in the scorner's seat. His passion is to remain true to the word of I am, meditating day and night on the true revelation of light. He will be standing firm like a flourishing tree planted by God's design, deeply rooted by the brooks of bliss, bearing fruit in every season of life. He is never dry, never fainting, ever blessed, ever prosperous. But how different are the wicked? They are like chaff, blown away by the wind. Man, you know there's two ways to do marriage. You know that? There's your way and God's way. You know there's two ways to do your personal finances. There's your way, which is me first, and then there's God's way, God first. You know, there's two ways to treat people. There's your way and the human way, which is to use them. And then there's God's way, which is to love them and serve them and bless them. Right? There's our way, and then there's God's way. And when we do it again and do it God's way, well, verse 6 happens. When they had done so, they caught such a large number of fish that their nets began to break. I want you to catch this here at the end of the story. And there's so much more to this story we don't have time to get into today, is that miracles, hang with me, follow obedience. Look, we all want the miracle in our life. We all want God to supernaturally zap us and to fix our problem or fix our challenges or fix our issues, but we really don't want to have to obey first. Right? But Peter, no miracle had happened yet. And Peter said, but because you say so, Lord, I will let down the nets. And so then he goes back out into deep water and he puts down his nets and he's like, what am I doing? This is crazy, right? And all of a sudden the nets began to break because of the catch of fish that he had taken. Miracles follow obedience. Maybe your prayer today is for God to do the miracle and the more in your life. Maybe it's, God, I need you to fill my empty boat. And for you, it's not a boat. It's a marriage. That's as empty as Peter's boat was. Or maybe for you, it's your soul. Maybe for you, it's something completely different. I don't even know what it might be for you. But we all have an empty boat in our life that God longs to fill. I want to show you a picture. I'm wearing my shirt today. A couple of years ago, I started a ministry called Pastor the Pastor Ministries, where we take pastors on trips and just encourage them, because pastors give out so much to people that we want to encourage them and shepherd them and pastor them, right? And so we do these free trips for anybody that's a head pastor. We do these free trips for them just to love on them and serve them. And so we took a group of 11. All these guys are church planners. And they're the crazies of all the pastors, right? So we took them on a trip to New Orleans, and we're hanging out, we're having fun, and we thought, what better way than to get them to eat raw oysters, right? And so most of them wouldn't try them, but this is Pastor Terry Vaughn right here on the left from South Bend, Indiana, and he's hustling, praying, and then eating right here according to his shirt, and he is going for the raw oyster. And man, we had fun, but then the fun ended the next day because we all took him out on a professionally guided fishing trip, and everybody's catching fish except for Pastor Terry Vaughn from South Bend, Indiana. And Pastor Terry's not catching anything, and Pastor Terry, he's not having any fun. And then the ribbing starts when we get back of, hey, Pastor Terry, how much fish did you catch? Don't fish with Terry in your boat, right? And Pastor Terry doesn't get to eat tonight because he didn't contribute, right? And I mean, it was everybody's just ribbing Pastor Terry, just ribbing Pastor Terry. And Pastor Terry, he kind of gets mad about this. And he's like, man, I'm not putting up with this. Well, behind our lodge where we were staying was some fishing ponds, and nobody had been catching anything in these fishing ponds. Pastor Terry says, I'm changing my bait. And I'm going back out. You guys can nap, because we were up early before daylight to catch these guided fishing trips, right? And he goes back out. All of a sudden, 30 minutes go by, and I hear somebody yelling, Pastor Brian. And I go out there, and Terry has a grin on his face that went the entire length of his face. And he's holding up a bass that was bigger than any fish we had caught with any of the professional guides. And a matter of fact, he goes, this ain't enough to show it to you, Pastor Brian. He takes off running, goes in the lodge. He's in the lodge in this picture. And he's finding every guy that is napping and sleeping and talking, and he's taking that bass and showing them, I can catch fish, right? I can catch fish. Look, in true Jesus form, he was tired. Most of us were napping. We had been up super early before daylight. But Terry comes back, and he changes his bait, and he changes the pond, and he goes back to fishing. A couple of years ago, there was a worship group out of North Carolina that came out with a song. And the song was just called Do It Again. And I love the lyrics of Do It Again. They said, walking around these walls, I thought by now they'd fall, but you've never failed me yet. Waiting for change to come, knowing the battle's won, for you have never failed me yet. Your promise still stands. Great is your faithfulness. Faithfulness, I'm still in your hands. This is my confidence. You've never failed me yet. Now catch this one. I know the night won't last. Your word will come to pass. My heart will sing your praise again. I've seen you move the mountains, and I believe I'll see you do it again. I'll see you do it again. God, you've been faithful. You've shown up. And when you show up, everything changes. And I know that we're tired and we're exhausted, and we have all this perceived failure in our life, and we have all these broken pieces of us scattered along the way, right? And God, how can you use me? I don't know. I know you want me to do it again. I know you want me to do it God's way. I know you want me to show back up. I know even though I'm tired and I'm exhausted, I know you're wanting me to serve you and bless others and love people and love you first and love you more than I love anybody else. But God, honestly, I don't know. Man, as we sing this final song, I just want you to take a moment right in your seat, right where you are, and have a conversation with God. Say, God, here's where I'm at authentically, in a real way. I'm going to talk to you. I'm going to share my heart with you. And God, I don't know. I don't know what it's going to look like, but I'm willing to do it your way. I'm willing to do life your way. I'm willing to do marriage your way. I'm willing to do whatever it is that is seemingly empty in your life. I'm willing to give that over to you and do it your way. God, as we shift and transition into our time of worship, God, we long to honor you. We long to have things work out. But God, it means a bit of a surrender. Even when we don't like people telling us what to do, it means that we have to give our time back over to you, even though we're selfish with our time. And it means that God, we're going to have to step out again, but maybe this time into deeper waters, knowing that you're in our boat and you're the one that transforms, not us. So God, we trust in you today. We believe in you today. We give over to you everything that we are. In Christ's name we pray.